The door slammed shut behind her as she rushed out, her high heels echoing down the hallway. I'd just gotten out of the shower, still wrapping the towel around me, when she barely glanced my way. "I'm going to Jen's," she said, eyes avoiding mine like they always did when something didn't add up. The dress she wore wasn't meant for a casual party. It clung to her in ways that made my stomach tighten with a feeling I couldn't shake. I watched her walk out, and that's when I noticed the sleek, black car parked outside. The kind of car that belonged to someone who was much more than just a friend. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a soft vibration that seemed to echo through the silence. I didn't even think about it, just grabbed it and unlocked the screen. My heart skipped a beat as I read the message, "I can't wait to see you tonight. Don't worry about John. He won't suspect a thing." I froze. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks, but it wasn't just the message, it was the fact that I knew. I knew she wasn't just going to a birthday party. I knew she was with him. My hands shook as I took a deep breath and grabbed my jacket. The truth was waiting outside the door, and I wasn't about to let it slip away. The night air was cold as I stepped out of the house, my feet hitting the pavement with a rhythmic force that matched the pounding in my chest. I didn't have a plan, no clear strategy, just the urgent need to confront the truth. To end the uncertainty, to stop pretending like everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. The car was still there, gleaming under the streetlights. I had no idea whose it was, but I knew exactly what it meant. My wife, Samantha, was out there with someone else. Someone who wasn't me. My mind raced as I drove, the city lights blurring by in streaks of yellow and white. I tried to focus, tried to hold my anger at bay long enough to think clearly. But the feeling of betrayal burned through me like wildfire, the thought of her in that dress, with him, sending waves of nausea through my stomach. I could feel the knot in my throat, the bitter taste of jealousy and humiliation that had no name but was consuming me nonetheless. I didn't know how long I drove, but eventually, I found myself parked outside a bar on the edge of town. The kind of place that wasn't on anyone's must-visit list, but still had enough people to be packed on a Friday night. There, in front of the dimly lit entrance, I saw them. Samantha was laughing, her head tilted back just a little too far, too carefree. She was with Rick, the man whose name had been in the text. I could see them clearly, standing too close, her hand resting on his arm like they'd known each other forever. The man had a smile that didn't belong to someone who was just a friend, and Samantha's face had that look, the one she used to give me when things were good, when I was the one making her laugh, the one who made her feel alive. Now, it was all for him. For a moment, I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The sight of them together sent a mix of emotions spiraling through me, anger, disbelief, sadness, and a deep, aching sense of betrayal. My chest felt tight as if there was no room to breathe, as if the world had suddenly become a place where nothing made sense. But I couldn't stand there forever. The man who called himself my wife's friend was out there, and I needed answers. I needed to confront them, to face the truth head-on. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, my steps purposeful, my heart pounding. The night felt cold, too cold, but it didn't matter. I couldn't feel the cold with everything else inside me burning so hot. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed a few people glancing at me, probably wondering why someone so out of place would be standing in front of that dive bar. But I didn't care. The only thing I cared about was the fact that my wife was betraying me in front of my eyes. She didn't even have the decency to hide it, to spare me the pain of finding out in some other way. No, she was laughing, enjoying herself, as if I didn't exist, as if our years together meant nothing. When I got close enough, I saw her. Samantha caught my eye, and for a brief moment, she froze. Her smile faltered, just for a split second, but it was enough. I could see it in her eyes, she had been caught. She knew exactly what I had seen, and she wasn't ready for it. Her face quickly shifted back into that confident, fake smile. She brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear, as if it was just another casual encounter. "John," she said, her voice light and almost too sweet, "what are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the silence hang in the air between us, thick with the weight of the betrayal. My heart felt heavy, and the words I had rehearsed in my head suddenly seemed too small, too weak to match the enormity of what had happened. How could she do this? How could she stand there, look me in the eye, and act like nothing had changed? Like everything was still the same? Rick, standing next to her, gave me a quick glance before leaning in, speaking with that self-assured tone that men like him always used when they thought they were in control. "Hey man, you're a little late for the party, don't you think?" I didn't flinch. I wasn't going to let him get under my skin. I was beyond that. Instead, I looked at Samantha again, waiting for her to say something, anything that could make this make sense. But she didn't. She just stood there, like she was waiting for me to accept what had already happened, like she was waiting for me to leave, to walk away like I hadn't just seen her with him. "Is this really happening?" I asked, my voice low but filled with a sharp edge of disbelief. "Am I really standing here, watching my wife with another man?" Her expression faltered for just a moment, but then she shrugged, as if to say it didn't matter. "John, you need to relax. It's not what you think." It wasn't what I thought. How could she say that? The evidence was right in front of me. I didn't need any more explanations. I needed the truth. The real truth. I wasn't going to stand there and let her lie to me anymore. "You think I'm stupid?" I spat, my words sharp, cutting through the air. "You think I don't know what's going on here?" Samantha didn't respond at first, and for a moment, I thought maybe she would actually admit it, maybe she would finally tell me the truth. But instead, she let out a quiet laugh, as if it was all just a joke. "You need to get over it, John. It's not the end of the world." That's when I snapped. The pain, the anger, the sheer betrayal, it all collided at once, and I wasn't going to stand there and let her make me feel small. I had to say what I needed to say. "Get over it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me. You've been sleeping with him behind my back, and now you're acting like I'm the crazy one." She didn't look sorry. Not in the least. Instead, she stood there, her arms crossed, looking at me with a mix of pity and amusement. "John, you're not as important as you think you are. So just go home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the person I had trusted with everything. This was a stranger. A woman who had no problem lying, no problem shattering everything we had built together. And in that moment, I knew something. I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to walk away without making sure she knew exactly what she had lost. I stood there, my fists clenched by my sides, trying to keep my composure as I stared at Samantha, unable to process what was unfolding right in front of me. Her response, so cold, so dismissive, was the final straw. I had spent years trusting her, sharing everything, building a life together, and now, standing here, I realized it had all been a lie. My stomach twisted, the feeling of betrayal making my knees weak. Rick, standing next to her, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clearly uncomfortable. He probably didn't expect me to confront him like this, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. I wasn't about to let him walk away thinking that I was the fool in this situation. He might have had her, but he didn't get to play the role of the smug, entitled man who could just take what didn't belong to him. I took a step forward, narrowing the space between us. "So, this is your big plan?" I asked, my voice lower now but full of venom. "You get my wife to believe that she can just do whatever she wants, and I'm supposed to be okay with it? I'm supposed to let you waltz in here and act like you've done nothing wrong?" Samantha didn't flinch, but Rick looked at me for a moment, sizing me up. It's not like that, man, he started, his voice dripping with false concern. Samantha's a grown woman, she can do what she wants. You don't need to get all worked up over this. My jaw tightened. You're right. She can do whatever she wants, but that doesn't make it right. And I'm damn sure not just going to stand here and let you play the part of the perfect guy who's just helping her out. She gave me an irritated look. John, can you just get over yourself? This is none of your business anymore. I don't owe you anything. Those words hit harder than I could have ever imagined. She didn't even care. There was no remorse, no guilt in her eyes, just a coldness that sent a chill down my spine. She didn't see the damage she'd caused. To her, I was just another inconvenience, a shadow in her perfect little world. And Rick, well, he was the man of the hour now. The one who had all the answers, who got all the perks while I was left holding the shattered pieces of my marriage. I couldn't stand it any longer. My mind raced, thinking back on all the times she had dismissed me, avoided my questions, lied about where she'd been, who she'd been with. I had been so blind, so trusting. How had I let it go on this long without seeing the truth? How had I let her manipulate me, wrap me around her finger, while she played me for a fool? I'm not done yet, I muttered through gritted teeth. I don't care if you're both so damn smug about this. I'm not letting it slide. Rick smirked, clearly enjoying the show. You should just go home, man. You don't belong here anymore. Samantha doesn't need you. That was it. I couldn't take any more of his condescending tone, of his casual dismissal of everything we had. Without thinking, I took a step forward and shoved him in the chest, hard. The impact wasn't just physical, it was everything that had built up inside me, all the rage, all the hurt, crashing out in one movement. He stumbled back, caught off guard, and for a moment, everything was still. Samantha gasped, her eyes wide in surprise. John, what the hell are you doing? But I didn't care. My heart was racing, my hands shaking, and yet, I felt more alive than I had in weeks. Maybe it was because I was finally fighting back. Finally standing up for myself, for the person I used to be before this all began. Before I let her tear me down, bit by bit. Rick recovered quickly, glaring at me with a mix of anger and amusement. You're going to regret that, man, he spat. You have no idea who you're messing with. I don't give a damn who you are, I said, my voice low but steady. What I care about is the fact that you're here, taking everything from me. You think you've won, but you haven't. You'll never have what I had with her. You're just a sideshow. I'm the one she promised everything to. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Rick didn't speak. He just stood there, his eyes locked on mine, a flicker of doubt passing through them. I could see it, the realization that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the hero in this story. Maybe he wasn't the one who had the life he thought he did. But Samantha wasn't done. She stepped forward, her voice sharp and cruel. You really think I care about any of that? She asked, her words cutting like a blade. You think I give a damn about our perfect little life? That's all it ever was, John. A perfect little lie. And I'm done pretending. Her words were like a slap across my face. I had been so sure that, deep down, she would feel something. Some regret, some remorse. But no. She was cold. Calculating. A stranger. You don't get to say that, I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. You don't get to throw away everything we had just like that. You made a choice, Samantha. And now you'll deal with the consequences. She shook her head, almost amused. Oh, please. You're pathetic. Go home. You're embarrassing yourself. I wanted to shout, to scream, to make her feel every ounce of pain that I had been carrying for weeks. But I knew it wouldn't matter. She was beyond saving, beyond caring. It was over. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd shared my life with, was gone. Replaced by someone who cared only about herself, about her own desires. But this wasn't the end. No, not for me. I wasn't going to walk away without making sure she understood exactly what she had lost. I turned and walked away, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. The night was far from over, and I was just getting started. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my chest tight, my thoughts whirling around in chaotic circles. I could hear the faint buzz of the bar's lights above me, but everything else seemed to fade into the background. It was just me and Samantha, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted, standing there in front of me, with Rick, that man I now despised, by her side. Her eyes avoided mine, flickering briefly before she turned her attention to Rick, who was still leaning against the bar, a smug grin plastered on his face. It was a grin that said he had won. And in that moment, I couldn't help but feel that he had. I had walked into this place expecting to find some semblance of answers, some flicker of remorse in Samantha's eyes, but all I got was cold indifference. "John," she finally said, her voice coming out flat, lacking any real emotion. "What are you doing here?" I could barely hold my composure, the anger that was bubbling up inside threatening to explode. My hands clenched into fists at my sides as I stepped closer to her, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating off me. "I think the question is," I said, my voice low but steady, "what the hell is going on here?" Rick made his move, stepping forward and puffing his chest out, clearly trying to assert dominance in the situation. "Look, man, we don't need to make a scene. It's just a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. My mind reeled. The nerve of him to say something so ridiculous. I wasn't the fool in this situation, but it felt like they were trying to make me believe I was. Trying to make me question my own sanity. No. I wasn't going to fall for it. "No," I spat. "This is not a misunderstanding. My wife," I paused, the word catching in my throat, "has been lying to me for who knows how long, and you, Rick, are the one who's been helping her with it." Samantha's face twisted, her eyes narrowing as she glared at me. The coldness in her expression was something I hadn't seen before, and it chilled me to the core. "Don't make me the bad guy here," she said with a sneer. "You're the one who's making everything complicated. You should have known better. You should have seen it." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. My stomach turned. It wasn't the regret I had expected. There was no remorse. No apology. No sign that she cared about what she was doing to me. Instead, she was blaming me. Like I was the one who had done something wrong. "You're unbelievable," I muttered, the words barely escaping my lips before she cut me off. "Stop acting like you're the victim here," she said, her voice sharp. "You've been out of it for months, John. You were never present." I didn't want to live a lie anymore. I needed more, and I found it. I felt the blood rush to my face as my mind processed her words. More? Was that what this was about? She needed more than me. More than the man who had been there for her, who had supported her through thick and thin. I had given her everything, every bit of love, loyalty, and trust one had, and this was how she repaid me? With lies, with deception, with betrayal? The anger surged again, hotter this time, and I had to force myself to keep calm, to think before I did something I would regret. But it was hard. So hard. I had never felt so small, so powerless in my life. It was like she was playing me for a fool, and I couldn't stand it. Rick, still hovering in the background, took a few steps toward me, his smirk never faltering. "You need to just accept it, man. It's over," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "She doesn't need you anymore. So why don't you just go home and move on?" I stared at him, the words cutting through me, but I didn't let them break me. I wasn't going to let this guy, this stranger, dictate my emotions. This wasn't about him. This wasn't even about Samantha anymore. It was about me. About my life. I had to take control. I had to make sure she knew she didn't get to treat me like this and walk away unscathed. No, I said, my voice firmer this time. It's not over. Not yet. You can't just walk away from everything like it was nothing. I'm not going to let you. I turned back to Samantha, my heart pounding in my chest as I looked at her for what felt like the first time in weeks. This was the woman I had loved, the woman who had shared my life, my dreams. And now she was standing there, completely different. Cold. Detached. No remorse. No guilt. What happened to us, Sam? I asked, my voice soft, but filled with pain. What happened to the woman I married? The woman I trusted? Her eyes flickered for a second, but only a second. She took a deep breath and shook her head, as if I was the one being unreasonable. I don't know, John. Maybe I grew up. Maybe I figured out what I really wanted. But it's too late for that now. You're just in the way. You should have seen it coming. Those words, those final words, hit me like a punch to the gut. They echoed in my mind, rattling around like a cruel reminder that she had already given up on us. That the woman I had fought for, the woman I had loved, had already moved on. And now, she was just rubbing it in my face. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand there and let her talk to me like that. I turned on my heel and walked away, not looking back. I wasn't going to beg her. I wasn't going to make excuses. I had already given her everything, and it was clear she didn't want it. So, I walked away. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, I realized something. I was free. Free from her lies, free from her manipulation. Free to finally start over. The walk back to the car was a blur, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. The words she had spoken to me echoed over and over again in my head. You should have seen it coming. The nerve of her to say that, like I was the one who had failed. But the truth was, I had seen it. I had seen the little signs over the last few months, but I had pushed them away. I had made excuses for her, for myself, convincing myself that everything would go back to normal, that we could fix it. But now I realized that the truth had been right in front of me all along. The sting of her betrayal felt like an open wound, raw and fresh. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, and the cold night air only seemed to deepen the ache in my chest. The parking lot where I had left my car felt like a distant world, as if I were walking through a dream. I couldn't escape the realization that everything I had thought was real had been nothing more than a facade. Samantha, the woman I had shared my life with, was gone. She was no longer the person I had married, and I couldn't just pretend that everything was fine anymore. By the time I reached my car, the numbness had begun to set in. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, the engine's hum filling the silence around me. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. For a moment, I just sat there, staring straight ahead, letting the stillness wash over me. The phone in my pocket buzzed, pulling me out of my daze. I didn't even need to check it to know who it was. I had been expecting this. A text from Samantha. She hadn't even given me the decency of a face-to-face apology, but now she wanted to talk. I pulled out the phone, my hands trembling slightly as I unlocked the screen. The message was short and to the point: we need to talk. Meet me tomorrow. I stared at the screen, the words searing through me. She still didn't get it. She still didn't understand that there was nothing left to talk about. But a part of me, some small part, wondered if maybe this was her last attempt to explain herself, to make me understand why she had done this. I didn't know if I was curious or just afraid of the finality of it all, but I found myself typing a response before I could think better of it. I don't think there's anything left to say, Sam. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It felt good, in a strange way, to finally take control of the situation. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to beg for answers or for her to come back. I had already given her everything I had, and she had thrown it away without a second thought. As I sat in the car, watching the glowing screen of my phone, I realized something. The pain I was feeling, this deep ache in my chest, it wasn't going to last forever. It couldn't. I had to move on. I couldn't keep hanging on to a woman who had already let me go. And I wasn't going to spend another second of my life wondering why she had done it. It didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was what I was going to do next. I started the car and drove aimlessly through the city streets, not caring where I went. The night felt like a blur, the neon lights flashing by, the hum of the tires on the road the only sound I could focus on. I thought about the good times, the happy moments we had shared. It wasn't that I regretted those memories. But I realized now that those were just moments in time. They weren't who we were anymore. They weren't who I was. I made my way to the outskirts of town, to a small park near the river. It was quiet here, peaceful even, and I needed the solitude. I parked the car and sat there for a while, the engine running, the lights of the park casting long shadows across the empty benches. This was where I had come to think, to clear my head. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, I was facing something I had never faced before. I stepped out of the car, the cool breeze brushing against my face, and walked toward the riverbank. The water was calm, the only ripples coming from the occasional breeze. I watched it for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened, about the life I thought I was living, about the future that I had thought was already mapped out for me. I had been so sure. So sure that we were building something together. But now, it felt like that future was slipping away, like sand through my fingers. The truth was, I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know what I was supposed to do next. I didn't know how to let go of someone who had been such a huge part of my life for so long. But I knew I had to. I couldn't keep waiting around for someone who didn't care enough to be honest with me. I couldn't keep holding on to a relationship that was only in my mind. As I stood there, staring out at the river, something inside me shifted. It was a small shift, a barely noticeable change, but it was there. It was the realization that I was going to be okay. I didn't need Samantha to define me. I didn't need her to make me feel whole. I had been enough all along. And now it was time for me to start believing that again. I took a deep breath and turned away from the river, heading back to the car. The night was still young, but I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a while, I wasn't afraid of it. The days that followed felt like a blur, each one merging into the next, with the weight of Samantha's betrayal hanging over me like a shadow. I had thought I'd be consumed by rage, by the overwhelming anger that I felt when I first discovered what had been happening behind my back. But as the days passed, the anger slowly transformed into something else. It was like a fire that had burned so hot and so fast, only to leave behind an eerie calm. There was still hurt, of course, but it didn't consume me anymore. It was simply there, a part of my reality that I would have to live with, but not something that controlled me. I had already made the decision. I wasn't going to let her back in. I wasn't going to listen to her excuses or let her try to explain away the things she had done. What we had was gone. But it was hard to accept that, hard to completely let go of the idea of the life we had built together. I had spent so many years convincing myself that we were happy, that we were strong, that we were a team. And now it all seemed like a lie. One afternoon, a week after that final confrontation, I found myself back at the same spot where I had gone after I walked out on Samantha, by the river, sitting on the edge of the park bench, staring out at the still waters. It was becoming a place of refuge for me, a place where I could think, where I could let my emotions run free without the weight of judgment. The park was empty, save for a few people walking their dogs or jogging past, completely oblivious to the chaos inside me. The world went on, and I couldn't help but feel like I was stuck in a place where time moved slower than it should. I wanted to scream at the universe to stop, to wait for me to catch up. But it didn't. And so I sat there, letting the thoughts drift by like the water in front of me. I had stopped responding to Samantha's messages. Her texts had become increasingly desperate. The last one she had sent said, "Please, let's talk." I'm sorry. But I had nothing left to say to her. The words had all been spoken. What more was there to say? There was no apology big enough, no explanation that could undo the damage she had caused. I was done listening to her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been living in a lie. I had thought that our love was the exception, that we were somehow different, stronger than everyone else. But the truth was, we weren't. We were just like everyone else. We had flaws, and we had mistakes, but we were also capable of hurting each other in ways we never imagined. And I had been too blind to see it. A week had passed since I last saw Samantha, and I hadn't heard from Rick. He had probably moved on too, convinced that he had won, that he had gotten the woman he wanted. But I knew the truth. He had only won for a moment. She was never going to be his. Not truly. He was a part of a chapter that was already over, and one day, he would realize that too. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking more about the future. About what came next. I had spent so much time focusing on the past, on the things I had lost, that I had neglected to think about the things I could gain. This wasn't the end. This was just a new beginning, and I was the one who got to decide where it went from here. I stood up from the bench and walked toward my car. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement, and the cool evening air brushed against my skin. It felt like a signal, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. I had no idea where life was going to take me next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let fear control me anymore. I wasn't going to live in the shadow of my past mistakes. I had to let go. I had to stop thinking that the pain I was feeling was the end of everything. It wasn't. It was just a part of the process. A necessary step on the way to something better. The next day, I decided to do something for myself. It had been so long since I had taken the time to really care for myself, to think about my own happiness, instead of focusing on keeping the relationship intact. I went to the gym for the first time in weeks. I hadn't been working out, hadn't been doing anything for myself. I had been consumed by the idea of saving something that was already broken. But today, I was done with that. Today, I was going to focus on me. The gym was packed as usual, but I didn't mind. I needed the distraction, needed to feel the burn in my muscles, to feel something other than the weight of my heart in my chest. The adrenaline from the workout hit me hard, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was doing something good for myself. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was in control again. After my workout, I grabbed a smoothie and sat in the parking lot, staring out at the street in front of me. It wasn't much, but it was a step. A small one. But it was a step in the right direction. And that was what mattered. I couldn't let the past define me anymore. I had to move forward. I had to trust that better things were ahead. As I sat there, I received another message from Samantha. "John, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I stared at the message for a moment, my fingers hovering over the screen. I thought about responding, about telling her everything I had been thinking. But then I realized something. There was nothing left to say. It was over. There was no need for closure from her. The closure I needed was the one I was giving myself. I put the phone down and started the car, driving away. I wasn't going to get caught up in her apologies, in the past. I had already moved on. I was going to focus on myself, on rebuilding the life that I had lost. And with each passing day, I was going to get stronger, better, and more certain of who I was without her. The days after my decision to move on were hard, but they were the kind of hard that led to real growth. At first, it felt like I was walking around in a fog, navigating a world that didn't feel quite right without the weight of Samantha's presence in it. For so long, I had defined myself by her, by us. But now, I was learning how to exist without that definition, without the one thing I thought I couldn't live without. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the life we used to share. The memories flooded back, small moments that seemed so trivial at the time but now seemed monumental, her laugh, the way her eyes would light up when we talked about the future, the way she held my hand when we were together. All of those moments had been real, but they had been built on something fragile, something I couldn't see through the fog of my own devotion. But as the days wore on, the sting of those memories began to fade, replaced by a new sense of clarity. I realized that I had been so focused on holding onto something that wasn't meant to be that I had neglected the most important thing, myself. I had spent so much time trying to fix something that was already broken, trying to find a way to make her see what we had, that I had lost sight of my own worth. The truth was, I didn't need her to validate me. I didn't need her to make me feel whole. I was already whole. I started going out more, taking up new hobbies, spending time with friends who had stuck by me during all of this. They had always been there, but I had been too wrapped up in my own world to appreciate them. Now, I saw their loyalty, their support, in a new light. They had always been my foundation, and I had neglected them in favor of a woman who had ultimately betrayed me. It felt good to reconnect with them, to remind myself that there was more to life than the woman who had walked away. One evening, I met up with a friend, Mike, at a local bar. We had been friends for years, but the chaos of my relationship had kept us from seeing much of each other recently. As we caught up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. There was something so comforting about talking to someone who knew me before all the heartache, before the pain of betrayal had clouded everything I did. Mike had always been the kind of friend who would listen, no matter what, and I appreciated that more than I could express. "You've been through a lot, man," Mike said, after I had filled him in on everything that had happened. "But you're doing the right thing. You're moving forward, and that's all you can do." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "I know. But some days, it feels like I'm stuck in this loop. Like I'm just going through the motions, but I'm not really living." "You will," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "It'll take time, but you'll get there. You're stronger than you think." His words resonated with me more than I expected. I had been trying so hard to push past everything that had happened, to just get over it, that I hadn't really stopped to think about the process. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that took time, something that required patience and, most importantly, self-compassion. I had spent so much of my life blaming myself, wondering where I went wrong, and I realized now that I needed to let go of that. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't the villain in this story, either. As the night wore on, I found myself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in a long time. It felt good, almost cathartic, to let go of the weight that had been holding me back. I didn't need to be sad or angry anymore. I could just be. I could live my life without the constant fear of being abandoned, of being betrayed. I could trust again, not just others, but myself. The next day, I decided to take a break from everything. I had been so focused on rebuilding, on fixing my life, that I had forgotten what it was like to just relax, to take a step back. I drove out to the countryside, to a small cabin I had rented for the weekend. It was isolated, peaceful, and exactly what I needed. For the first time in a long time, I found myself breathing deeply, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. I walked through the woods, enjoying the solitude, the sound of the leaves rustling in the wind. There was something therapeutic about being surrounded by nature, by the simplicity of the world around me. It reminded me that life didn't have to be complicated. I didn't have to chase after things that weren't meant for me. I didn't have to fight for something that was already lost. As I sat by the fireplace later that evening, sipping on a glass of wine, I thought about everything that had happened. I thought about Samantha, about the man I used to be, and about the man I was becoming. I realized that the journey wasn't just about moving on from her, it was about discovering who I was without her. I didn't need her validation anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I just needed to be true to myself. The next morning, I woke up early, feeling more at peace than I had in a long time. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I had spent so much time running from the pain, trying to avoid it, but now I realized that I had to face it head-on. I had to let it go, and I had to move forward. As I packed up and prepared to leave the cabin, I felt a sense of closure, not because of anything Samantha had done, but because of what I had done for myself. I had finally let go. I had let go of the past, of the lies, of the pain, and I was ready to move on. When I returned home, I felt different. Lighter. I wasn't burdened by the weight of the past anymore. I was free to live my life, to pursue the things that made me happy, to be the person I was always meant to be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting over. The feeling of freedom didn't last as long as I had hoped. I thought that after all the pain, after all the heartbreak, would somehow find a sense of peace that would stay with me. But life, it seemed, wasn't done testing me. As time went on, I began to realize just how deeply the scars from my marriage had cut me. I had convinced myself that I was moving forward, but there were moments, small moments, that would trigger everything I had tried so hard to bury. The hardest part was accepting that I couldn't just flip a switch and erase the past. I had been so focused on getting over it, on making the pain go away, that I hadn't truly processed everything that had happened. I hadn't allowed myself to feel it, to really understand the depth of my grief. The anger had long since faded, but the sadness lingered like a dark cloud that never quite disappeared. I found myself alone in the evenings more often than not. I was used to Samantha being there, used to hearing her voice, feeling her presence in the house. Now, the silence felt suffocating. I didn't need her back, but I realized how much I had taken her for granted. How much I had allowed myself to believe in something that wasn't real. It wasn't just the betrayal that hurt, it was the fact that I had given so much of myself to someone who never truly saw me for who I was. I tried to distract myself. I went back to the gym, focusing on my workouts and pushing myself harder than before. I spent time with friends, went out to bars, and tried to rekindle old hobbies that I had long since abandoned. But no matter how hard I tried, the truth was always there, lurking in the background, waiting for a quiet moment to make itself known. One night, after a particularly grueling workout, I found myself sitting alone at a bar, nursing a beer, and staring at the TV in the corner. The noise of the crowd was distant, the conversations around me fading into white noise. I wasn't thinking about Samantha. I wasn't thinking about Rick. I was just existing. And that, in itself, was a small victory. I didn't expect to see anyone I knew, but when I looked up, I saw Mike, my old friend, walking toward me. I had almost forgotten about him, so focused on my own recovery, but there he was, offering a small wave. We had seen each other a few times since everything happened, but this was the first time we had really sat down to talk. "You doing okay?" Mike asked as he slid into the seat next to me. His expression was sincere, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure whether I wanted to talk about it. "I'm getting there," I replied, keeping my tone casual. I wasn't sure how much I wanted to share, but I appreciated the concern. Mike had always been there for me, even when I hadn't fully realized how much I needed him. It's been a weird few weeks. But I'm getting through it." He nodded, sensing the weight of my words. You're allowed to not be okay, you know. There's no timeline for healing. No right way to do it. I let out a quiet laugh, the sound of it almost foreign to me. I hadn't laughed like that in a while. Yeah, well. I'm still figuring that out. Some days it's easier than others. Mike sat back in his chair, eyes studying me as if trying to gauge my level of honesty. You know, you don't have to do this alone, right? I know you're pushing forward, but don't forget that you have people who care about you. People who want to help you get through this. We're all here. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to truly lean on anyone, and yet Mike's words made me realize that I had been pushing people away for no reason other than my own pride. I had been trying to do everything on my own because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. I had convinced myself that I couldn't let anyone see how broken I was. But the truth was, I didn't have to carry that burden alone. I'm not good at asking for help, I admitted, looking down at my beer. I guess I've always tried to figure things out by myself. But maybe it's time I stopped pretending that I don't need anyone. Mike's smile was small, but genuine. That's what friends are for, man. No shame in needing people. It felt like a weight had been lifted, a small but significant shift in my mindset. Maybe I didn't have to carry the pain in silence. Maybe I didn't have to pretend that I was fine when I wasn't. It didn't mean I was weak. It meant I was human. And, for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel that, human, vulnerable, and not alone. After that night, I spent more time reconnecting with my friends. I was still learning how to heal, still figuring out what life looked like without Samantha, but I wasn't doing it alone anymore. I didn't need to force myself to be okay. I didn't need to hide the sadness or the frustration. I was learning to accept that the journey wasn't linear, and that healing didn't mean pretending everything was fine. But there were still moments when the weight of the past would creep back in. It wasn't always in the form of a memory of Samantha or Rick. Sometimes, it was just the reminder that I had once been someone who had believed in forever, in a love that was supposed to last. But now, I was becoming someone new. Someone who understood that love wasn't the answer to everything. That love didn't mean sacrifice at the cost of your own happiness. And that sometimes, the hardest thing was letting go of something that you thought you could never live without. And so, I kept moving forward, little by little. There were moments of doubt, moments when I thought I couldn't go on, when the memories felt like a wave threatening to drown me. But each time, I found myself pushing through, finding new strength in the process. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And in time, I realized that I wasn't just moving forward from the past. I was growing, evolving into a version of myself that didn't depend on anyone else to define my worth. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. It was quiet, peaceful in a way that it hadn't been in a long time. I woke up with a sense of clarity, the weight of the past finally lifting, though not entirely gone. It was there, like a shadow at the edges of my consciousness, but it wasn't controlling me anymore. I had spent so many months in the throes of betrayal, drowning in the hurt, the confusion, the anger. But now, it felt different. I could breathe again. I was free. The apartment had become a space that reflected my progress. It wasn't a lavish home, but it was mine, and for the first time, it felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could truly start over. I had spent months drowning in memories, of Samantha, of our life together, but now, I was beginning to build a new life, a life that was mine and mine alone. It was a process, a slow and steady climb, but I was finally beginning to understand what it meant to truly heal. I sat at the small kitchen table, sipping coffee, letting the warmth of the drink seep into me. There were still moments when I thought about her, about the life I thought we would have. I would remember the times we laughed together, the plans we made, the simple moments when everything seemed perfect. But those moments didn't define me anymore. They weren't the anchor that held me to the past. I had let go, and while it still stung sometimes, I knew deep down that it was for the best. I had found a new rhythm, a new sense of purpose. I had started taking care of myself again, physically, emotionally, mentally. The gym had become a regular part of my routine, not as a way to escape, but as a way to reclaim my own body, my own strength. I had lost myself for so long, had given so much of myself to a relationship that wasn't meant to be, that I had forgotten how to take care of the most important person in my life, me. But now, I was rediscovering that, one step at a time. I was learning how to enjoy my own company again. To spend time with myself without feeling like something was missing. It was an uncomfortable adjustment at first, but now, it felt like a kind of freedom. I didn't need to rely on anyone else for my happiness. I had everything I needed within me. And the more I allowed myself to sit with that, the more I understood that this was what real strength looked like, not clinging to something that wasn't good for me, but learning to stand on my own 2 feet. But just when I thought I was finally finding peace, the past found its way back into my life. It wasn't unexpected. I knew that at some point, I would run into Samantha again, or that she would try to reach out to me. The question wasn't if it would happen, it was when. And that time came sooner than I thought. One evening, as I was heading out to meet a friend, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. At first, I didn't recognize it, but then I saw the name attached to it. Samantha. The message was short, but the words felt like they cut straight to the heart. I need to see you. Can we meet? Please. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me felt anger rising up again. Part of me wanted to hit delete and never look back. But another part of me, the part that had been holding onto some small fragment of the life we had shared, felt a flicker of something else, a desire for closure. A desire to understand why it all happened, to hear her side of things, to finally put the past to rest. I didn't reply right away. I didn't want to rush into anything. I needed to think about this, to decide what was best for me. I had worked so hard to get to where I was, to rebuild my life, and I wasn't sure if seeing her again was a step backward or forward. That night, I went to bed early, hoping sleep would bring some clarity. The question weighed on me, keeping me up longer than I wanted. Was it worth reopening that chapter, or was it better to keep moving forward, to let the past stay where it belonged? The next day, I woke up with a sense of calm. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to meet her. I had already given her enough of my time, enough of my energy, enough of my heart. I didn't need answers from her. The only answers I needed were the ones I had already found within myself. I was stronger than I had been before. I didn't need closure from someone who had already made it clear they didn't care enough to offer it themselves. I didn't respond to her message. I didn't need to. The truth was, I had already moved on. And in that silence, in that choice to let her go once and for all, I found my final piece of peace. It wasn't easy, but I had learned something crucial in the last few months. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending the past hadn't happened. It meant choosing to move forward, despite the pain, despite the heartache, despite everything that had come before. It meant recognizing that my happiness, my future, wasn't tied to anyone else. It was mine to build, mine to create. And so, I kept going. I kept building my life, one piece at a time. The past was behind me, and I was walking forward into a new future, stronger and more certain of who I was than ever before. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I could honestly say that I was okay.